I want to start with two numbers. The first is $204,000. That's how much the average graduate of Whittier Law School borrowed to get their degree. The other number is $747,000. That's the median salary those same graduates were making. So you borrow over 200 grand, you come out making 40 grand. By one analysis of federal loan data, that is the worst debt to income ratio of any law school in the country. And it's not even close. On a standard 10-year repayment plan, that's a monthly payment bigger than a lot of people's rent on a salary that can barely cover the rent in the first place. And here's the part that should make you angry. Whittier doesn't even exist anymore. The school was shut down. And so thousands of people are out there right now in their 30s and 40s paying off a loan for a degree from a school that closed its doors, working jobs that the JD wasn't required for, wondering where it all went wrong. Now, I'm not going to tell you where it went wrong. It went wrong on the day they said yes to a school they should have run away from. And the brutal truth is, almost every single one of them could have seen it coming. The warning signs were sitting right there in public data that anybody can pull up for free in about 10 minutes. So that's what we're going to talk about today. By the time we're done, you're going to be able to look at any law school in the country and know with real confidence whether it's worth your money or whether it's going to follow you around for the next 20 years like a bad credit score. I'm going to show you the exact red flags, the exact numbers to pull, and the exact math to run. First, I want to be clear about something. I don't want this to get twisted. I'm not anti-law school. I've spent the past 20 years helping people get into law school. I run an LSAT prep coaching company built entirely around helping people get great LSAT scores and great admissions outcomes. I honestly love this stuff, and law school could be one of the best decisions you'll ever make. And for a lot of people, it is the smartest financial move of their lives. It's the thing that doubles or triples their earning power and opens doors that stay open for 40 years. And the data backs that up. For the class of 2024, the overall employment rate was 93.4% within 10 months of graduation. That is one of the strongest legal job markets in decades. And so the people saying law school's a scam, don't go, they're wrong, and they're being honestly a bit intellectually lazy. But you should know that that 93.4% number is an average, and averages are misleading. They're misleading in a really specific, dangerous way. Think about it like this. If I've got one foot in a bucket of ice water and another foot in a bucket of boiling water, on average, I'm comfortable. The average is a comfortable temperature, but both my feet are in serious trouble. The average tells you nothing about what's actually happening on the ground. And legal employment and legal salaries work exactly the same way. The numbers are not spread out evenly. They are in two completely different worlds. There are a small group of elite law schools where graduates walk into jobs paying 200 grand a year, and they pay off their loans in a couple of years. Then there is a much bigger group of law schools where graduates make only $50,000 or $60,000 a year. They can't service their debt, and at the very bottom, they can't even pass the bar. Here is what the research actually shows. A Georgetown report that ranked law schools by what graduates earn after you subtract their debt found that only 7 schools in the whole country clear $200,000 net of debt 4 years out. You've got 7 schools like that: Columbia, Penn, Chicago, Cornell, Stanford, Harvard, and Northwestern. And if you're wondering where Yale and a few other big names are, it's because of what this metric measures: earnings minus debt at the 4-year mark. There are some elite schools that funnel a lot of graduates into clerkships and public interest jobs that pay modestly at first, so they don't top this specific list, even though they are, of course, outstanding schools. And the exact order at the top is not really the point. It's the shape of this whole thing. Now, the 33 lowest ranked schools on that list, their graduates earn under $55,000 net of debt 4 years out, and they've got lower bar passage on top of that. The same report found that the best returns are concentrated in about 20% of law schools. That's 1 in 5. And so the question is never, should I go to law school? The question is, should I go to this law school at this price for these outcomes? And you can actually answer that question with data. I've spent far too much time buried in the ABA disclosure reports. For those who aren't aware, every accredited law school in America is required by the ABA to publish detailed data on their bar passage rates, their employment outcomes, the debt of their graduates, and who they admit. This is all public information, and most applicants never read a single page of it, and the schools are counting on that. And so I want to show you today how to read it, because once you can, you're not going to get fooled. We're going to cover how a genuinely bad law school actually works, the money mechanism underneath it, so the warning signs make sense. Then I'll walk you through the specific red flags and the exact check you can run on any school. A genuinely bad law school actually is not in the business of producing lawyers. They're in the business of collecting tuition. Those are two very different businesses. Here's how the bad version works. The school keeps its admission standards as low as it can get away with. It takes people with LSAT scores and GPAs that statistically mean they're going to struggle to pass the bar. Now, why would a school do that? Because every seat it fills is a tuition check, and that's mostly federal loan money. For the past 20 years or so, graduate and professional students could borrow through a federal program called Grad Plus. And the key detail was that there was effectively no cap. You could borrow up to the full cost of attendance every single year, no matter how high the school set that cost. So a school could charge whatever it wanted, fill its seats with students borrowing the full amount, and collect that money up front, regardless of what happened to those students later. And those loans carry serious interest, too, recently in the neighborhood of 9%. And that interest starts piling up from the day your money hits your account. Now, there is a big change you should know about because it's happening right now. Starting July 2026, the federal government is eliminating Grad Plus for new borrowers and capping how much law and professional students can borrow federally, somewhere between $50,000 a year in that range, capping out at $200,000 total for all of your graduate education. And what that does is it creates a brand new risk for you, because at an expensive school with weak outcomes, federal loans may no longer cover the full bill, which pushes students towards private loans, which are worse in almost every single way that counts. They're credit-based, they have higher interest rates, and they don't qualify for income-driven repayment plans and loan forgiveness that make federal debt survivable. And so the trap just changes shape. It doesn't disappear. You want to watch out for any school that's quick to steer you towards a private lender to bridge the gap, because that's just a new version of the same problem. And so if you follow the money, the school's getting paid, the risk gets transferred onto you as the student, and if you flunk out after the first year, the school keeps your money. Now, if you graduate but you can't pass the bar, you're in trouble as well. If you pass the bar but you can only find a job paying 50 grand against your 180 grand of debt, the school keeps your money. There is no version of this where the school loses, only you could lose. Now, most law schools are legit institutions doing their best. They're not running a con here. But at the bottom of the market for the worst law schools, the schools that consistently have terrible numbers, a lot of them are running some version of this playbook. Now, I want to tell you about the info law schools because this is the clearest case of this you'll ever see. There was a company called InfoLaw, owned by a private equity firm, that ran a chain of for-profit law schools. There was Charlotte Law School in North Carolina, Arizona Summit in Phoenix, and Florida Coastal in Jacksonville. Now, their business model was exactly what I just described. They open the doors wide, admit huge classes of low-ranking students, they collect federal loan money, and Florida Coastal at the peak had one of the largest law schools in the country. But then the numbers caught up with them. Their bar passage rates cratered. Florida Coastal's bar passage rate fell to around 31%, meaning more than 2 out of 3 of their graduates couldn't pass the bar, which is the test that lets you practice law. And they all had the full debt load. And so the federal government cut off their access to student loans and the school collapsed. Charlotte shut down right in the middle of the school year in 2017. Arizona Summit lost its accreditation, closed in 2018. Florida Coastal eventually was shut down in 2021. All 3 of them are gone now. And every student who took out loans for those degrees is still on the hook, holding a degree from a school that no longer exists. And it's not even just for profits. There was a school called Indiana Tech that opened up in 2013, spent like $20 million building it. It graduated almost nobody and shut down 4 years later in 2017. Now, the schools that do the hardest recruiting on the people with the fewest options are the ones that are at most risk of shutting down. They target people who got rejected everywhere else, people who really want to be lawyers and just need some school to say yes to them. And so the school tells them, we believe in you, come on in. It feels like a lifeline because they've been told no by everybody else. But it's a trap. You want to steer clear of that. Now, there are some warning signs that can help you determine which law schools are the predatory ones, which ones are worth avoiding at all costs. The biggest red flag is if their bar passage rate is below the line. The whole point of law school, the entire reason it exists, is to get you licensed to practice law. And to do that, you've got to pass the bar exam. So a law school's bar passage rate is the single most important number it publishes. If a school cannot get its graduates to pass the bar, nothing else matters. The fancy building doesn't matter. The mission statement doesn't matter. If you can't pass the bar, you wasted 3 years and a lot of money to not become a lawyer. Now, the ABA has put this in writing. They have an accreditation rule called Standard 316. And it says, in plain English, at least 75% of a school's graduates who sit for the bar have to pass it within 2 years of graduating. That is the minimum to keep accreditation. 3 out of 4 students passing the bar within 2 years. And so when you look at a law school, you're going to find 2 bar passage numbers in the ABA disclosures. Just Google X Law School ABA disclosure and you'll find the details. The first number to look at is the bar passage rate, first-time takers, the percentage of graduates who pass the bar on their first attempt. The second number is the ultimate or 2-year bar passage rate, which is the percentage of students who eventually pass the bar within 2 years, including those who took it more than once. And of course, the 2-year number is always going to be higher because it gives you extra tries. Now, a bad law school is going to play games with this. They're going to advertise the 2-year number, which is the higher one, and they're going to bury the first-time number, which is why you don't look at the law school's website. You look at the ABA website, which is the disclosure without all the marketing dressing on top. Now, in the most recent ABA disclosure data, the lowest 2-year bar passage rate in the entire country belonged to Cooley Law School at 57.47%. Their first-time bar passage rate was 51.54%, pretty low, the second lowest in the country. Roughly half their students are failing the bar. It was only behind Inter-American University in Puerto Rico. So roughly half of Cooley's graduates failed the bar on their first try, and even after 2 years and multiple attempts, more than 4 in 10 of their graduates still hadn't passed. And of course, the ABA noticed because they collect this data. In August of 2025, they put Cooley on probation for falling short of Standard 316. Now, I want to be completely fair here because this is important and it teaches you how the system actually works. Cooley fought this. They argued their newer numbers were improving, and in November of 2025, the ABA reviewed their case and removed them from probation after finding they had demonstrated compliance. And so as of right now, Cooley is an accredited, approved law school. They are off probation. I am not saying they're at danger of closing, but I'm telling you that when a law school's bar numbers are the lowest in the country and the national accreditation body puts it on probation, that's a red flag, no matter how the appeal turns out. You want to steer clear. Now, you also don't want to compare a school's bar passage rate to the national average. You want to compare it to the average for the state where most of its graduates take the bar. Bar exams have different pass rates in different states. A 65% bar passage rate might be totally normal in one state and a disaster in another. And so every 509 report, that's the ABA disclosure, it shows you the school's passage rate right next to the statewide average for that jurisdiction. If a school is sitting well below its own state's average, that's not the exam being hard. That's the school underperforming, and that's the number that should scare you. Now, the second red flag you want to look for, employment numbers. And this one's a bit sneaky because there are lots of different ways to present employment numbers. The school could tell you a technically true number that is deliberately designed to mislead you. A school will put up a big banner saying something like 94% of our graduates are employed. And that might be true, but what do they mean by employed? When the ABA collects employment data, it sorts jobs into a bunch of different categories, and they are wildly different from each other. The category that you should actually care about is called full-time, long-term, bar passage required. The ABA recently relabeled it bar admission required, but it means the same thing. You want to know what percentage are in a real lawyer job, full-time position, not temporary, and it should require you to be a licensed attorney. In other words, not employed as a barista. You want the number that justifies the degree. That's why you went to law school after all, right? Now, there is a category called JD Advantage. These are jobs where having a law degree helps you, but you don't actually need it to become a lawyer. And sometimes that's a great outcome, like a Harvard grad going into consulting. But at a bottom tier law school, JD Advantage often means something a lot less glamorous, a job you could have gotten without spending 3 years and six figures. And then there are part-time jobs. Those are short-term jobs lasting under a year. Then there are also school-funded positions, where the school literally pays its own graduates to work somewhere temporarily so that it can count them as employed on its report. They're looking to boost up the numbers with their own money. So if there is a school with a high number of school-funded jobs, that's a big tell that the school could not place its graduates in the real market, so they bought itself some better-looking numbers. Then you've also got underemployment. The ABA tracks graduates who are working part-time in short-term gigs, going back for another degree, or unemployed and still looking. Nationally, that underemployment figure runs around 8.8%. At a healthy school, it's going to be lower. At a bad school, it's going to be a big chunk of the class. So your job here is to avoid the marketing speak, go to the ABA disclosure directly, find the full-time, long-term bar required percentage. That one number tells you what share of the class got a real lawyer job. At a stronger school, that number is going to be high, often above 80%. At a weaker school, it could be less than half, with the rest of the employed number padded out by JD Advantage, part-time, short-term, and school-funded jobs. Now, the third red flag you want to look for is debt that outruns income. This is the relationship between what you owe and what you earn. Your total law school debt should be at or below your expected starting salary. It should be 1-to-1 or better. And so if you're going to come out owing 100 grand, you want to be reasonably confident you're going to start with a salary of 100 grand or more. If your debt and income are roughly balanced, the loans might be tough, but they're still manageable. You could pay them down on a reasonable schedule and get on with life. The problem is what happens when that ratio blows up. Go back to Whittier, I mentioned earlier. $204,000 in debt, $40,000 in salary. That is a 5-to-1 ratio. That is not a loan that you're able to pay off under any reasonable time frame. Now, under federal repayment guidelines, you're supposed to keep your total debt payments under a reasonable share of your income. And a 5-to-1 ratio, there is no plan that works without stretching payments out over decades with interest compounding the entire time. Now let's get to red flag number 4, a class profile that's a warning sign. Every law school publishes the LSAT and GPA profile of the class that just admitted. You'll see a median LSAT score. You'll see the 25th and 75th percentiles, which means the score where a quarter of the class is below and the score where a quarter of the class is above. You want to look at that 25th percentile number because that is the bottom quarter of the class. Now, it tells you a couple of things. It tells you about the school. There is an ABA rule, Standard 501, that says a school is only supposed to admit students who appear capable of finishing law school and passing the bar. When a school has a 25th percentile LSAT down in the low 140s, they're quietly telling you that a school is admitting a meaningful chunk of its class from a score range where, statistically, a lot of people will struggle to pass the bar. And the school knows this, and they have the data. They know what the predicted value of the LSAT is, but they're doing it anyway because every seat is a tuition check. A lower entering profile is the school choosing to fill seats instead of select and filter out students. Low entering profiles mean low bar passage rates, which means the school is in danger of losing their accreditation based on future bar passage rates reducing over time. In other words, low numbers entering means low bar passage rates and low employment outcomes out the other end. And so if the only schools saying yes to you are the schools with bad profiles and bad outcomes, it tells you your application is not yet strong enough to get you good options. And so the single biggest lever on that by a mile is your LSAT score, getting that LSAT score up to get you better outcomes. We'll get there. The 5th red flag you want to look for is a school that is in risk of losing its ABA accreditation. If the school loses that accreditation, if they close while you're enrolled, you're in serious trouble. Because in most states, you can only sit for the bar if you graduated from an ABA accredited school. And so if your school's accreditation gets pulled, your degree could become close to worthless for the one thing you needed it for. And if they close mid-program, you're left scrambling. Now, the good news is the ABA publishes data on all of this. When a school gets on probation or found out of compliance with the standard, there is a public notice. Now, there are a couple of standards that trigger these notices. There's Standard 316, bar passage, Standard 202, whether the school has financial resources to keep operating, and standard 501 is about admitting students who can actually succeed. If you see these notices, those are signals the school could be in real danger. Now, the sixth red flag. These are judgment calls. They're not necessarily in the headline numbers. You could look at attrition, for example. The 509 report shows you how many students leave the school after the first year, and it separates those who left for academic reasons, meaning they flunked out, versus those who lost their scholarships. So, for example, there are conditional scholarships requiring you to maintain a certain GPA to keep the scholarship. But law schools grade on a curve. And so if the school gives a conditional scholarship to half the class, there's a pretty good chance a big chunk of those students will fall below the required GPA after the first year and lose the money. And that's how it's designed the whole time. You could see these stats in the 509 reports to give you a sense of how many students keep versus lose the scholarship. Now, I've talked through a lot of red flags here. I mentioned earlier the LSAT score as a leading indicator of the strength of the class. In other words, if you can apply to law schools with higher LSAT scores, you will get into better law schools, you will get more scholarship money, you get into schools that are more likely to get you better outcomes in terms of employment rates and bar passage rates as well. If you're not getting good offers, the single biggest lever you've got available to you is to boost up your LSAT score to raise your scholarship offers, get you into better law schools, and that's what I help students do. If you're looking for support with your LSAT prep, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well.